Well, I think no surprise that everybody seems to think that New Jersey is the likeliest destination for Timo Meier at this point, and the fit is perfect. So
you're now listening to the Boys in the Booth podcast with your hosts, Harper Cody, Chad Melbourne, and Casey Abrams.
That's a big one.
Yeah!
welcome to episode 160 of the podcast. All three of us back together for this one, Cody, Abrams, and Melbourne. Guys, hard to believe we're almost at the end of February here, and we're less than 2 weeks away from the NHL trade deadline. It seems like we've been talking about this forever, building up to it, and we're less than a couple of weeks away. So how are we doing this evening?
It's funny that this time is like simultaneously one of my favorite times of the year and least favorite times of the year. I do love the hype of the trades. I love when trades happen, but all of the rumors and breaking, all of that drives me insane because 90% of it is absolute garbage, not true, not happening, doesn't matter. Jacob Chikrin's never getting traded. Clip that later when he does. But Harp, yeah, I'm back here. Past weekend was busy because I was moving, as last week I wasn't on the episode because I was dealing with a partial flood. So that's behind me now. I'll be living in Toronto for the next month or maybe two. We'll see how it goes. And then I should be in a new place here soon. So yeah, busy times, but I've got a fun weekend coming up, going to Tremblant for 4 days. So all good now. How about you, Chad?
Very nice. Harper, are we taking count of how many backgrounds Casey has recorded the podcast in front of? Because this might be the 10th apartment in the last few years since we've...
This is the 10th place I've lived since 2015.
Since we started doing the podcast. So, maybe we need to get a whiteboard or something and put a couple more ticks down in the next month or so.
Days since last week.
Yeah, exactly. We'll have a counter behind you. No, boys, doing well. Last week, obviously, for me as a Leafs fan, was pretty exciting. I did that episode, solo, a Let Us Explain episode, explaining the Ryan O'Reilly trade. And if you listen to that, you'll know that although I think it was a bit of an overpay, I am pretty excited to get the player. And not only him, but Noel Acciari as well. So very excited about that. Also, last episode, when it was just two of us, Harp, I mentioned that reading week was coming up. Well, now it's here. But the thing is, I think I underestimated how much reading and writing, actually, I would have to do on reading week because apparently I have an assignment due tonight, and it's the first day of reading week. So riddle me that. It makes absolutely zero sense, but that's what my few days have been. And overall, it's been pretty good, except for fantasy, which we're going to get into a little bit here. But before we do, Harper, how are you doing? How was your weekend at the Brockville Winter Classic?
It was an awesome weekend. I know that you guys saw enough photos and videos and stuff like that from the weekend, but it was great and got to do some really cool things. Got to play in the outdoor tournament down at Rotary Park, where you guys spend quite a bit of time when you're home here in Brockville, of course. So that was a lot of fun. The team I was on, MNP, actually ended up winning the tournament, which was awesome to be a part of. And then Sunday got to do play-by-play for the big alumni game in front of just a packed house at the Memorial Center with the Maple Leafs alumni in town. And so really great weekend. And later on, we're actually going to hear a part of an interview that I did with one of the Maple Leafs alumni that was here in Brockville this past weekend. So stay tuned for that later on. But guys, I'm great, and it was a really good weekend. So couldn't be happier.
Right on.
All right, fellas. Well, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this episode. And as we mentioned off the top, the NHL trade deadline is less than a few weeks away. And we're going to look at the center of attention when it comes to the forward market. And that, of course, is Timo Meier of the San Jose Sharks. And as we look at this forward market, it's looking a little thin now. Like, he's the biggest name that's available. I think it's fair to say Ryan O'Reilly is off the board. We know that now. Before him, Vladimir Tarasenko going to the New York Rangers, and of course Bo Horvat before that going to the New York Islanders from the Vancouver Canucks. So this is going to be fun. You guys know that I'm excited for this, and I love coming up with mock trades and potential destinations for guys, and we're going to do that with the biggest fish available, and that's Timo Meier of the San Jose Sharks, the fantastic power forward that I'm convinced Chad has a crush on. So, all right, Case, let's go to you first, and we're not going to be surprised at all with your potential suitor for Timo Meier that has been heavily out there in the rumor mill and such for quite some time.
Yeah, I'm pretty much contractually obliged to mention the Devils here. I was going to wear my San Jose jersey on top of my Devils jersey and, take the San Jose. It was going to be a whole spectacle. But of course, as you can imagine, they're in boxes right now. So not doing that. I'm going to talk about Timo Meier and New Jersey Devils. That's obviously been the rumor. I'm trying not to get my hopes up because Matthew Tkachuk and Johnny Gaudreau were rumored to the Devils at one point. Johnny Gaudreau, I pretty much was slotting him into my lineup at one point, and that didn't happen. But this one I'm feeling a little more comfortable in. So why the trade and sign makes sense is that this is the missing piece for the Devils. The thing the Devils lack up front is size and physicality. Their forwards are mostly undersized in the top six, and Tom Fitzgerald has been vocal that a top six forward is his target. He said, "I'm looking for a top six forward on the younger side with team control, and that he'd be willing to give up significant pieces." Well, that is exactly Timo Meier. Another thing is the Devils' power play is kind of their weakest point at like currently, and he is a power play beast, similar to an Alex Ovechkin, where he just kind of sets up in his spot and just wires them home. So those, the fit makes perfect sense, but now the connections, Harp, don't have an accident in your pants here, buddy. The connections, first of all, the obvious one, everyone talks about it, the Swiss connection. Hischier, Siegenthaler, both locked up long-term, so that's going to be a nice fit there. Tom Fitzgerald's brother, Scott, is the director of player personnel at San Jose. Greer, the GM of San Jose, was on the Devils coaching staff not long ago. 2019-2020 was his last season there. And finally, Claude Lemieux is Timo's agent, who Devils legend, and is also the agent for Fabian Zetterlund on the Devils. So connection galore here.
I love it.
Absolutely love it. So now into the trade. I have two scenarios, two different trade types, depending on what they want as the big piece in this. The first one being Alex Holtz, Miles Wood, Seamus Casey, a 2023 first round, and a 2024 fourth round for Timo Meier with salary retained probably 50% and some AHLer for the contract spot. So that's the first scenario I have here. And in both scenarios, Timo Meier signs immediately $9 million for 8 years. Similar but better than the Bo Horvat contract.
Okay, that's a lot.
So if we want to talk about that one first, I can get into the second one after.
Yeah, how about we do that? So this first deal then, Case, sending Timo Meier to the Devils is centered around Alex Holtz, correct? That's the main piece that you think is enticing San Jose into this deal?
I think obviously a first round pick is a main piece, but I think that there's going to be one blue chip prospect here, and Alex Holtz makes a ton of sense. Timo Meier's kind of what you want Alex Holtz to be in the future. That's kind of what his potential is, we'd hope. So it makes sense for the Devils to do the swap here because Timo Meier is the guy now and Holtz is the guy in the future. Makes sense for the rebuilding San Jose Sharks as well. He's a 7th overall pick. He has tons of upside. And honestly, I'm just having a hard time seeing him get into the Devils lineup consistently enough to start producing. So that'd be another good thing for San Jose. They can slide him in there with his buddy Eklund as well. And let's see what those two snipers can do.
Yeah, well, initial thoughts. I like the trade. Obviously, Timo Meier is the perfect fit for any contender, really, but especially the Devils, who need that sort of offense up front to complement some of their other guys who can score, but they also need that physicality above all. So Timo Meier obviously fits that mold. He shoots a shit ton more than almost anybody else in the entire league. He hits a lot, and he's just a great player all around. So the fit, I don't think we have to talk about that again. It's just perfect for any contender, but especially the Devils. In terms of the return, I don't mind it for New Jersey. I think if they can get a deal done for Timo Meier and get him signed without giving up one of Luke Hughes or Simon Nemec, then it's an absolute win.
I honestly think that there's 3 players that are almost untouchable and will be asked about from San Jose, and that's Nemec, Luke Hughes, and Dawson Mercer has really fallen into the category of untouchable for me. I'll really be hurt if he's gone for sure, but I think those 3 guys are out of the question, and the Devils would rather pile prospects in than give up any of those 3, because the Devils are like the ranked 3rd best pipeline in the league. They've got tons of guys in the system and a logjam at forward and defense. So it makes a lot of sense to give up more pieces than big pieces.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I like the return. I think it would be a relatively fair deal. Harper, what are your thoughts on this one?
Well, I think no surprise that everybody seems to think that New Jersey is the likeliest destination for Timo Meier at this point, and the fit is perfect. So, like you said, Chad, we don't need to get into that any further. But I like this return for both teams, for the Devils and for the San Jose Sharks. Holtz coming in, he can join Eklund and the other prospect, Bysted, that I talked about ahead of the World Juniors. They're all Swedes. They clearly like their 2 Swedish prospects. And you add another guy who is very talented and, like you said, Case, unfortunately can't get into the Devils lineup full time because there's simply just a logjam. So he'd be really good there. He would really excel. And Mike Greer clearly wants more picks and more prospects. So that's perfect. Seamus Casey, again, I think you could go either way. Maybe the return would be a little bit less if you went with Muka Medulin, who's also a first rounder instead of Seamus Casey. But, he was a second round pick and a very good defenseman. And then Miles Wood sheds a bit of salary off the books and goes back the other way, and then the first and potentially the 4th in 2024 as well. So I like the assets going each way for both teams, and again, just the fit with the size and the scoring ability and the Swiss connection as well. It's a match made in heaven for the New Jersey Devils, but really good trade built here by UCase, this first one, and I like the return for San Jose. If I'm in Mike Greer's shoes, I'd be happy about this for sure.
Yeah, and I think Miles Wood makes sense. It's not just a cap dump, but he's really struggling with New Jersey at the moment. He's playing 4th line constantly. The other night he played 4.5 minutes, I think it was. So it would make a lot of sense for a change of scenery for Miles Wood. And I think that you could slot in pretty highly with San Jose and kind of add a different, really replace that game style of Timo Meier, banging bodies, but also putting the puck in the net occasionally for Miles Wood and more so for Timo Meier. Now, the second trade I could talk about real quick here. Harp mentioned it already, but the big piece I think would be Shakira Mukhamadullin. He's, again, having a really great season in the KHL. He was a first-round pick for the Devils. There's been so much discussion on what this guy can be, but that's really yet to be seen. But the big piece here is not only that he's a young, talented defenseman with lots of upside, but he is also already signed to an NHL contract, removing that confusion, or not confusion, but the variability of a KHL player. So that's big for him. The next pieces would be Graham Clark and the 2023 first round pick, 2024 third round pick, upgrading from the fourth in the previous trade, and Andreas Johnson as the cap dump and contract flip. And then the same return for the Devils, Timo Meier, 50% retained and a AHL contract. So yeah, you're basically flipping your big prospect in the trade to being a defenseman instead here. And then I think the secondary pieces are better than in the first. So it kind of equals out in the end. Graham Clark's having himself an amazing season in the AHL right now. 18 goals, 21 assists in 49 games currently. He's only 21 years old and has been playing in the AHL for almost 3 years because of the pandemic. So that's some huge experience for him. And he's got a lot of upside as well. He's a third round pick, scored a lot of goals for the Ottawa 67s. And I think he's another guy that's going to get lost in the logjam in New Jersey. So it makes sense to give him a new home. And then, Andreas Johnson, he has a no trade clause, but I think it would be stupid to not waive that to get a chance with a team that could play him.
Yeah, very true. This one, personally, Case, I don't like as much if I'm the San Jose Sharks, because I think the return on the first one, just because you included Alexander Holtz as the key piece, I think makes more sense for not only you're getting a better player, but you're getting a better fit, I think, for San Jose. You talked about the Swedish connection of their young players, Harp, so I think the first one just makes more sense for that reason. Also, if I'm the Devils, even though internally they value Shakir Mukhamadullin pretty highly, I just don't know how much value he has around the league not being a top 10 pick, like compared to a guy like Alex Holtz, who everyone coming into the draft knew his name, watched him light up the World Juniors, and has seen him develop. I just think a guy like Shakir Mukhamadullin might not have the upper limit that a guy like Holtz does when it comes to production. I know Mukhamadulin's a defenseman, but I'm saying I think there's a difference there in the high-end potential between the two prospects. So if it were me and I'm representing San Jose, I definitely want to get the first package rather than the second. Also, too, because it included a guy like Seamus Casey, who I was really high on in this most recent draft, and I think around the league, whether it's fair or not, might have even similar value to a player like Mukhamadullin. So yeah, I would prefer the first package. I think the assets are there for the second one. It's just not as sexy to me if I'm San Jose.
The one thing I thought about with this second scenario is actually adding one more piece on New Jersey's side, and that being one of the more ready now defensemen in whether that's Kevin Ball, Nikita Okhoichuk, or Riley Walsh. I think that makes sense for San Jose. Not a lot in the pipeline on the back end. So adding two prospects on defense, one more ready now, would be nice for them. And then this trade for me starts to sound like Taylor Hall to the Arizona Coyotes, where they didn't necessarily get the big pieces in that trade, but it was an abundance of players coming back. There was 3 young AHL players with potential. One of them has turned out, so it didn't really work for the Devils, but they did get a first and a third. The first was Dawson Mercer, and the third was Jonas Siegenthaler. They traded that pick for him. So this second scenario, if you add in a Riley Walsh, Koichuk, or Ball, that starts to sound like the Taylor Hall trade to me, and that makes a lot of sense with comparables. Taylor Hall, that was the season after he won the MVP, so there's a lot of value there.
Yeah, true. And there's something to be said about this trade too, like just thinking about what San Jose really wants, like thinking about where their timeline is right now, because at this point, I don't really think we know until maybe after the trade deadline or maybe after this summer when they've kind of picked a direction and gone with it. We know they have a bunch of young good players, but they still have some pretty tough contracts on that team. Like Erik Karlsson is likely not going to be moved at the deadline. And Marc-Edouard Vlasic is another tough contract. Like, who knows when they'll be able to compete. I could also see San Jose wanting to go the route of 2 first-round picks in a return and sort of spreading them out so they get twice the opportunity at a good player in the future if they think they're a bit further along than maybe some other teams do.
If that means we don't have to give Alex Holtz, you can have 2 first-round picks. You can have 3.
Yeah, there you go. And Chad, sorry to jump all over you there before you were talking, but I will say I agree with you that the first package I liked a lot more, but I will say with the second package and Muka Madulin, being kind of the big name going back to San Jose, the Sharks are pretty thin when it comes to defensemen in the pipeline. So I know we've got Seamus Casey in the first one, but in the second package, I like the idea of having, a couple of defensemen in there, Muka Madulin and maybe Riley Walsh or Koychuk or someone added in there as well, because I can't think of any defensive prospects that they've got in the pipeline, whereas the other one would add to an already strong, prospect forward group that they've got developing there. So that's what I think when I think of the second package there. But honestly, both pretty solid case. And again, I mean, this fit Meier with the Devils just makes so much sense. And I like the connections that you had there too. All right, Chad, we'll go to you now with your potential suitor for Timo Meier. And really, this is the second team that kind of comes up in a lot of conversations when it comes to potential suitors for the big Sharks power forwards. So let's get to yours and your mock trades.
And now, a word from our sponsors. This podcast is sponsored by Liquid IV. Whether you're staying active or nursing a hangover, Liquid IV has you covered. Just 1 stick of Liquid IV in 16 ounces of water hydrates faster and more efficiently than water alone. It contains 5 essential vitamins, B3, B5, B6, B12, and vitamin C, with 3 times the electrolytes of traditional sports drinks. It's made with premium ingredients, it's non-GMO, and it's free from gluten, dairy, and soy. There are plenty of awesome flavors, but my personal favorite right now is lemon lime. So get 20% off when you go to liquidiv.com and use the code boys_in_the_booth at checkout. That's 20% off anything in the store when you order using the promo code boys_in_the_booth at liquidiv.com. Experience better hydration today with Liquid IV. This podcast is also sponsored by the best ticket app out there, SeatGeek. SeatGeek takes the confusion out of buying tickets, making it quick and easy to get the best deals on tickets to your favorite sporting events. Plus, Boys in the Booth listeners get $20 off their first ticket purchase on SeatGeek with the promo code Boys in the Booth in all caps. So click the link in the description down below to download the app, and remember to get your discounted tickets using the code Boys in the Booth in all caps. Get great seats for a fraction of the cost with SeatGeek. Yeah, that's right. The Carolina Hurricanes are among the top suitors, in my opinion, to land Timo Meier. And it's because, surprise, surprise, they don't have Max Pacioretty in their lineup anymore. If you asked me 2 months ago if Carolina was going to be in on Timo Meier, obviously I would have said no. They have Pacioretty coming in on from their LTIR spot. He's going to play well for them down the stretch. He makes $7 million. Well, unfortunately, he did come back, but then was re-injured shortly after with the same Achilles injury, and we don't really know what his future is going to look like. That's a tough injury to have. I think it's similar to the Erik Karlsson injury, which just completely destroyed what he was as a player for like 3 seasons, and now all of a sudden he's back. So I think it's kind of up in the air, and who knows what's going to happen with Pacioretty, if he's going to re-sign or whatever. But for that reason, for Pacioretty not being in the lineup, I think Timo Meier makes a ton of sense for Carolina, who is just having a fantastic season this year. And really, they're built very well top to bottom, but could always use more scoring. They don't have many guys who are above a point per game. I haven't looked today, but I think last time I looked, it was only Aho who was above a point per game. So they could use some scoring like that in their top six. And Carolina is a team that's criticized for not being super tough when it comes to the playoffs. So again, adding a guy like Timo Meier gives you some, grit, some sandpaper up front. He throws a ton of hits. So the fit to me is perfect for Carolina. In terms of the package and the deal that I think could shake out between the two teams, I mean, obviously going to Carolina is Timo Meier at 50% retained at a bare minimum. I think if they wanted to get a third team involved, like Toronto did with the Ryan O'Reilly deal, they could do that. I'm not sure they need to right now. They have almost $4 million in projected LTIR space that is usable right now. So I don't know. It would depend what other moves they want to make. But at the very minimum, 50% retained on Timo Meier. And in return, this is kind of a crapshoot. This is where the deal breaks down because it starts with a first round pick and then it ends with 2 or 3 of Carolina's B range prospects, because I think Carolina has a ton of those. And I'm looking at some players here. One that comes to mind is the 28th overall pick in 2019, Ryan Suzuki. Currently has 17 points in 25 AHL games this year for Chicago. Another one is Jack Drury, 42nd overall in 2018, 16 points in 18 AHL games this season. And then as a third piece on top of the first two and a first round pick, I would pick one of Simon Forsmark, Noel Gunler, Zion Nybeck, or Gleb Trikazov, or Cruz Lucius. They have a ton of players, none of whom I think are projected to be like sure bet top 6 players. I think there's a lot of magic beans in their prospect pool, despite it being very good, given the fact that they're a contending team. But that's how I see this deal shaking out. I feel like it's a deal similar to, like you mentioned, Case, with Taylor Hall a few years back, where they just get a bunch and kind of hope for the best in San Jose, that is. So that's the deal. What do you guys think about that? It's kind of loosely constructed, but that's how it stands.
So how many prospects were they getting? Sorry?
3 prospects and a first round pick, because I think all of the prospects that I mentioned, with the exception of maybe Noel Gunler, who was a second round pick recently, are in the B range. So I think 3 B prospects and a first.
So is that better than an A prospect, a B prospect, a current player, a first and a fourth? Because the one thing that the only reason I actually think that he can come to New Jersey is Tom Fitzgerald said, before you trade him, call me and I'll one up it. And I think that New Jersey can one up that Carolina deal. I like all those players and I like the idea, because you're saying everything I was saying about Taylor Hall trade, and like San Jose has ranked the 17th pipeline in the league. So they need a ton of prospects. Mm-hmm. And this trade makes a lot of sense to me and I do like it. But I think that in this competitive market, it's going to get beat. I think that the one thing Carolina and what I've read has to offer for Timo Meier, and I don't think that they want to do it, is Seth Jarvis.
100%.
And to me, I don't know if I would do that either. He's really fit in there. He's stepped up. He's having not as good of a season this year as he did last year, but that's a great player, and he's only going to get better as well. He's still young. But yeah, like, again, I think that this deal makes a lot of sense, and I like the, first and then tons of prospects, because that's what San Jose needs, but I think it can get topped.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. Although I do like the package, and Carolina kind of flies under the radar when it comes to having a really strong prospect pool. There are a lot of names that you can mention there. One name that I'm kind of surprised you didn't mention, Chad, was probably their best defensive prospect, and that's Scott Morrow, a second round pick in 2021. So you could always throw him in there. We talked a few minutes ago about how they're kind of thin when it comes to defensive prospects, so he could be in there as well. But yeah, if you're comparing this to the package that the first one that you came up with, Case, I mean, that one definitely beats it. But still, I think that this would be a solid return for San Jose. Solid 3-4 assets there, and Carolina gets a player who would just make them even better. And again, like I said when talking about the Hurricanes a couple of weeks ago, just a guy that would give them some easy goals, which they really desperately need. So I like it.
Yeah, I mean, Carolina's having the second best season in the league after the Boston Bruins. So yeah, they need that one piece to add to push them over the top.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense for Carolina. Even when I was mentioning this package, I don't know that it's the best available deal that they could put together. I think obviously that best package starts with Seth Jarvis, but I just don't think it makes sense for Carolina to do that because it doesn't make them that much better, I don't think, in the long term to get rid of a player like Seth Jarvis, a good young player who's in your lineup now and contributing. Like he just got his first hat trick the other night. I don't think it makes sense to get rid of him, even though Timo Meier is very, very good. Like it's a fine line you have to walk as a GM. And if the fit's not there because of the price, then, oh, well, you move on to the next player, and maybe you add somewhere else. Maybe it's on the back end. Maybe it's in your bottom six instead. So I think it makes sense for Carolina, but if the price is too steep, they're likely not going to pay it. The reason I brought them up as a team is because they just have so many B-level prospects who I think, the uncertainty sort of ranges between all of those guys, and there are some who are more certain than others, but I just look at their prospect pool, and I like a lot of the players, but they're just all B-level prospects, you know what I mean?
One thing I will also say about, like, I also like all the players you named. I've been pretty vocal about how I think Carolina drafts pretty good. They're not afraid to pick a undersized player that I like. But I think it does kind of fit under the same category as Mukhamadullin for the Devils, where the Devils are pretty high on Mukhamadullin, and they picked him earlier than most people would think. But Carolina is also picking all these players that are slipping, and they slip out of the first round, like Nyback and Gunler, and there's one more I can't remember. But these are guys that slip, so it's guys that Carolina is pretty high on, and who knows if San Jose is thinking the same thing. So kind of the same argument for against Mukhamadullin is pretty similar to some of these B guys for Carolina, guys that I like, but I don't know if they're necessarily the target for other teams.
Very true.
And with Carolina, we know that they set a price and they don't go over it, and if they feel that it's too much, then they'll move on to the next thing. And they do like players with terms. So, you got to think that if they do end up taking a big swing and acquiring a player like Timo Meier, they're going to want to sign him right away because they do like players with term. They don't like rentals. And again, Dundon and Dom Waddell, they set a price and they don't go over it. They have a value on players that they think is fair, and they don't go over it. All right, guys, to wrap up the conversation about the big fish available at the deadline, I've got kind of a surprise team. So we get through like New Jersey and Carolina. Those two definitely at the top make the most sense. But a team that has kind of just entered the sweepstakes for Timo Meier is the St. Louis Blues, which may come as kind of a surprise. And Chad, I know you've got a smirk on your face there because you sent this to me today, but I honestly, before you sent that to me on Instagram, I was already thinking about this and had heard it from a couple of hockey people a few times. Look, yes, the Blues have sold off a bit here, and definitely some more selling to come. We know that O'Reilly and Tarasenko and Achari and Mikkola are out the door. We expect Ivan Barbashev to get dealt as well. But now the Blues have given themselves or themselves some draft capital to play with. They've got 3 first-round picks in a very deep draft, and they could use that to their advantage. And now they have some cap flexibility as well. So with not having the desire to go through a long, grueling rebuild, they could go after a player like Timo Meier to jump into their core and kind of retool this team quickly. And so that is why I'm going to go with the St. Louis Blues. It's definitely an interesting one. I don't expect it to happen, but it would be quite something if it does happen, because we've seen this with Doug Armstrong before, where he makes a couple of big deals, he gets a ton of assets, and then he flips those assets to bring in other players that are going to help his team right away. And I think that there's a real possibility of that. He certainly is an aggressive GM, as we've seen, and he's not afraid to let big names go, as we've seen here, and going back to Pietrangelo, Perron, etc., and be aggressive and take big swings. So my deal, it's definitely a bit of a lesser return compared to you guys. I have to say that, with the cap flexibility that St. Louis has now, and fully expecting a player like Ivan Barbashev to head out the door at the deadline, no salary retention on San Jose's part for Timo Meier. So the whole deal goes to the St. Louis Blues, that final year of the $6 million. St. Louis is able to sign him right away to a long-term deal to join their core. And going back to the Sharks in the deal, a 2023 first-round pick. Again, they have 3 of those. So that gives San Jose another pick. And I think that there's a lot of desire for Mike Grier to have multiple first-rounders to move around the first round of the draft. Jimmy Snuggerud, a prospect, he goes the other way as well. He was a first-round pick in last year's draft. And, of course, I've got a connection with him. His dad, Dave, played for San Jose for 2 seasons back in his career. So he would certainly have a great resource to find out what San Jose is like. So Snuggerud, a first, and then one more piece, a second or a third in 2024. So kind of looking at this as a similar deal to the Alex DeBrincat one with Chicago and Ottawa, where it's a first, a second, and a third going to the Chicago Blackhawks for Alex DeBrincat, where in this case you've got 2 firsts essentially and a second or a third going to the San Jose Sharks from St. Louis for Timo Meier. So what do you guys think of this deal, guys?
Can't hear you, Case.
I can't hear. Yeah.
When it comes to the pieces going back to San Jose, I like it. And I think that San Jose would benefit from all of that, and it makes a ton of sense. But when it comes to the trade making sense in general, I don't like it. I did read about this San Jose or the St. Louis Blues possibly doing the reshaping and bringing in Meier, but I only think that really makes sense if this team didn't win a cup in 2018. They have all these picks now, and that's what this team needs. They're ranked the 29th prospect pool in the league by The Athletic, and they do not have a lot of guys even close. And then to think that Jimmy Snuggerud would have to be involved in this, he's probably their second best prospect, maybe first best. It's down to him and Bolduc. So I don't know if this team is in the position to be able to give up so many picks, especially because, the team isn't competing now, and they won't be able to compete for a long time if they give up all those picks as well. Whereas if you keep the picks, grab a ton of prospects in the next year or two, maybe 4 or 5 years later, those guys are all ready. And Kyrou, Robert Thomas, all those guys, they're in their prime. They're entering their prime at that time. So I think it would make a lot more sense for this team to hold on to these picks. And we've talked about this draft before and mentioned that the market is saying that second round picks are as highly valued as first round picks this year because it's such a deep draft. So having 3 first round picks, I think that's the best way to turn this team around within 5 years. And Timo Meier, sure, he's going to definitely make the team better right away. We've talked about how much we love this guy, but I don't know if San Jose or St. Louis has enough pieces around Timo Meier, Kyrou, and Robert Thomas for this to really make as much sense. Now, if they're really crazy and want to go reshaping like this or retooling, whatever the phrase you want to say, I like the trade, Harp. Like, the pieces are good. The trade is fair.
Personally, I don't think the package is enough to land Timo Meier, especially when we were talking about, especially that first package that Casey brought up from New Jersey, talking about Holtz and, Seamus Casey, a first, etc. I think there would need to be another piece bigger than a second round pick if they were going to land Timo Meier. But
say two first and a third.
Yeah, sure. Something like that. My problem with the trade case is kind of the same issues that you have with it, is that I just don't think it makes a lot of sense for this team. The problem is, if you acquire Timo Meier at the deadline, your team gets better. And then one of, your best first, actually, of the 3 picks, I guess you wouldn't even have it anymore, but that pick gets worse because your team gets better on the ice. So I just think it would be a complete mortgage of their future. And that's not a good thing for a team who really, aside from Kyrou and Thomas, like you mentioned, Case, they don't have very many prospects coming up. And then to give away Snuggerud would just be, again, kind of just mortgaging their future. So I don't think it makes a lot of sense for the team. I see why people are saying that they could be in on Meier just because they have so many assets right now. Yeah. But I just think if you want to rebuild and do things properly, a 2 to 5 year plan is way better than getting Timo Meier, getting better on the ice, having worse draft picks and fewer draft picks. Because also too, talking about how second rounders this year are as valuable as firsts in previous years, they don't have a second round pick this year. They only have the 3 firsts. So even if one of those goes, that's some massive draft capital that they're giving up.
Yeah. Again, I'm going to restate my point that if they didn't win a cup within the last 5 years, this makes more sense to me. But that recent history kind of throws that out in my mind. But yeah, if it wasn't for 2018, I'm saying sure, why not go for it?
Yeah, well, think about, imagine this were the Washington Capitals, right? Kind of in a similar situation, not really because the Caps have been better than the Blues this year, but coming into this season, kind of in a similar situation. They won a cup a few years ago, and now their core is aging, and, they're trying to compete for the playoffs. Washington obviously doing a better job than St. Louis. But if this was Washington and they were on the outside looking in, maybe it makes sense to kind of mortgage your future a bit to make one final push or a couple more pushes with the core that you already have. But for this young team in St. Louis, well, I say young because I'm referring to Kyrou and Thomas, who are 2 of their young stars. I just don't think it makes sense to go all in right now and get Timo Meier.
No, for sure. And I think that what makes the most sense is to use all of those 3 first round picks, or package one of them to get a couple of seconds or whatever in a very strong draft. But I could see this happening. We know how Doug Armstrong is. He's aggressive, and this market not really having the appetite for a long, grueling rebuild. And one other young player who I think will end up being a big part of this team is Jake Neighbors, that we haven't really mentioned. So you can throw him in there as well. But this would be certainly crazy to see. And again, I could have gone a couple of different ways. I could have gone with Vegas or Winnipeg, but Winnipeg is kind of tough because I don't see Meier signing there long term. And then with Vegas, I don't think Mike Greer and the Sharks would have an appetite to trade him within their division to an organization that they don't particularly like, as we've seen.
Quite the rivalry. And
exactly. So to me, that doesn't make sense. And, I think that the return from Vegas would have to be all worldly to land Timo Meier just because it's Vegas and, the rivalry there and being in the same division. So I said, you know what, why not? I'll go with St. Louis because Doug Armstrong is aggressive and he is not afraid to take big swings. But I would agree. Why, it would be cool if it happened, but it doesn't make a lot of sense for the Blues. All right, well, that wraps up the Timo Meier conversation. So good mock trades there, fellas, and we'll have to get our listeners' thoughts on Instagram with those 3 mock deals, and we'll see what happens with Timo Meier. Again, the deadline less than a couple of weeks away, happening on March 3rd. So let's wrap up this episode with Fantasy Corner, and then we're going to get to our interview to wrap things up in a little bit. So, Case, let's go to you first for Fantasy Corner.
You're now listening to the Fantasy Corner right here on the Boys in the Booth podcast.
Lost last week, super banged up team, lost a lot of games played, and Luke's team, they really showed up in the dying days, really. Nico Hischier in particular, 2 goals, 2 assists on Saturday, I think that was. That really kicked my ass and pushed Luke over the top. And I was saying that if I lost this game to Luke, that it's probably time for the teardown, the rebuild. But I don't know. Another win this week, I'm back in the playoffs. And I think it's more fun to just kind of be competitive enough. I've got a lot of keepers on my team that I'm excited about, and I've got the draft picks still remaining, so why not try to make the playoffs and get lucky or something. So I've got a big decision to make in the next 24 hours as our trade deadline is tomorrow, and we'll see. Pasternak might be the guy on the move. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you're a conservative seller and that's the route you go, and maybe you just get a couple draft picks for a player that, obviously you can't keep, and maybe that's Pasternak, so I could see it.
There's a few of these guys that might as well just turn the app off for the rest of the year. Like, I keep mentioning Book Hockey, like he's got like a borderline AHL fantasy team going now, so he's got every draft pick in the world next year, but not gonna have a lot of fun in the next 4 weeks.
I was gonna say he's got like every pick next year, so if he has, I haven't looked. I remember we were talking about who he has for keepers, and I don't think he has anybody crazy, but if he has a couple good keepers and then 3 first-round picks, like he could have a dangerous squad next year, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And talking about the playoff race too, Case, like every team from 7th to 12th has the same record, 10-8-0. So 2 games over 500, but there's only 2 spots available for all of those teams, 7th and 8th. Unless a team like the Dirty Birdies drop down, which seems unlikely because they're 11-7-0. Nico is our captain, is 12-6-0. So it's a tight race, so I don't blame you for being a bit hesitant on whether you're going to buy or sell, because like if you get one big player, you can make a push to make the playoffs, but if you sell one big player, then you could recoup some assets from someone you're not going to be able to keep. So it's definitely a tough decision. Talking about my week last week, guys, this was my one chance to take over first place in the league, and my guys absolutely blew it. It wasn't even close. It was supposed to be. I was projected to win 251 to 244. I think both of which would have been the highest point totals in our league. It was 1 and 2 facing off against each other, myself and Kuznetsov's third line. He ended up beating me 246 to 209, so he outperformed expectations just by a couple points, and I underperformed by about 40. It didn't help that Alex Ovechkin was in Russia dealing with the death of his father. obviously not going to blame him about that. That was a tough loss for him and the hockey community, obviously, but also my fantasy team. Timo Meier was also hurt last week. Matt Murray got put on LTIR, so I don't know when he's coming back, if ever, for the Maple Leafs. And the pickups that I made just didn't work out. I picked up a guy like Barrett Hayton. He really struggled all week long. I believe the first game he played for me, he was minus 3.5 points. So that just started me off terribly. He finished the week with 5 points, and I believe he played 4 games. So he's getting dropped immediately. I picked up Harvey Pinard from Montreal, and he only had 7.5 points. He was touted as this, incredible fantasy player, which he has been on the up and up, but 7.5 points for a week isn't going to cut it. The only player that showed up for me really was Boone Jenner, who had 28 points. But other than that, it was lackluster from all my boys, and I'm just really hoping that when it comes to playoff time and I have to beat Kuznetsov's third line, I'll be able to do it with everybody healthy. So I lost last week. I remain in second place with a record of 16-2-0. Kuznetsov's third line remains perfect in first place, 18-0-0. Holy.
Wow. Yeah, Holy is right. And not a good week for me last week as well. It was supposed to be a lot closer, although I was projected to lose against your brother-in-law, Cameron, there, Chad, North Korea, with Paul Korea's last name there. Great team name. And anyway, so yeah, he clobbered me 217-165 and just didn't have enough strong performances. Arturi Lehkonen, my best performer, only at 20.75 points. And Brady Tkachuk was a monster for him last week with 44 fantasy points. So got a close matchup so far this week against Eichel Tower, but really need a win this week because I've lost the last 2 weeks back to 500. I'm 9-9 and in 13th place right now, in danger of falling out of the playoff race here. So need a win this week for sure.
If you're looking to sell, Harp, I'm buying. I got some picks left. Not many, but a couple picks left. So if Zach Hyman is on the block or Vasilevsky, let me know.
Not a chance. Like I said in the group chat, the Sunnyvale Hockey Club will be a conservative buyer, so we'll see what we can do. But yeah, got to get back in the race here and get a win this week. Anyway, good episode, boys. Good to chat with you guys. Again, deadline coming up on March 3rd. Can't wait for that. And again, let us know what you think about our Timo Meier mock trades. And again, we've got a special guest. A part of the Toronto Maple Leafs alumni who was here in Brockville this past weekend for the Brockville Winter Classic is Trevor Kidd. And so here is a part of the interview that he and I did last week. So enjoy that, and we'll talk to you again next week. Trevor, I got to ask you right off the top, and I've had a lot of people ask me prior to this that this has got to be the first question you have to ask. So just how did you end up with those iconic Brian's checkered pads?
That's funny. Always had, I would say, different gear, helmet going back to my Calgary days. And in Calgary had the flames on the pads and fire-breathing dragon on the helmet. And when I was traded to Carolina, trying to think of something different, the checker is actually, and again, going back to those Carolina days, the hurricane warning flag looks exactly like that. It looks like that checker. So the real story behind it is the pads were, I said, let's put this hurricane warning basically symbol on my pads, my glove, my blocker. And it turned out that, it looked like a checkerboard pattern, and kept it, loved it, certainly kept it in Toronto. And it's been kind of neat after all these years. I know there's been, I think it was Sparks there wore it in Toronto.
Yeah.
I see various other kids still have this checkerboard pattern. Brian still makes it. They get a lot of requests for it. So the longevity of the pattern and of the thought going many moons ago still exists today, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was going to be my next question for you, just your initial reaction to Garrett Sparks wearing them in Toronto. And as you mentioned there, seeing so many kids requesting those kinds of pads, that must make you feel pretty good.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, it's and I'm not sure if the old Bryans guys that I worked with way back when, but it was always so collaborative. They were a unique company, 25 years ago, in that they tried to make, goaltenders wear this helmet equipment, and what it looked like was an expression. And Bryans was always so willing to be collaborative in that and finding that expression with what design would look like, not only for a helmet, but certainly the pads and the glove and the blocker that the guys wear. And you see a little bit that still today with the Bryans type gear. So still have I have some Toronto Maple Leaf versions of that, but I actually don't wear that stuff because I for some reason I feel that I'm going to pass it down the line here in our family, and so I have a version of it. I wear the Carolina Hurricanes version of that checkerboard pattern. That's what I usually wear when I'm playing that.
Oh, really cool. And, Trevor, your NHL career was really interesting. You dealt with a lot of, high expectations and pressure. You were a first-round pick back in the 1990 draft from the Calgary Flames. And, then you end up in Toronto for 2 seasons in the latter part of your career. And, look, Toronto is not an easy place to play, as you know. And so how did you deal with the pressure of that during your 2 seasons with the club, being a netminder and a first-round pick as a goaltender as well? How did you deal with all of that?
Well, my junior career was pretty. It was fast and furious, starting with the Wheat Kings and Spokane Chiefs Memorial Cup, won that with Spokane, and 3 World Juniors, winning 2 of those, and playing the Olympics. And you mentioned the first-round draft pick to Calgary and starting my career off there. As we've spoken about, played with Carolina, was in Florida for 3 years, and then finished things up in Toronto. I think what I remember the most about Toronto, when you're a young player, and I tell this story going back, and hockey players now for Hockey Canada, to me, does such an amazing job with the media part of the game. There's so much more education, dealing with players that they're just better equipped that they stepped into the NHL to handle the microscope, the pressures, the daily livings, the media, the attention, all those sorts of things. So those first few years in Calgary, I wouldn't say I overly embraced that component.
Yeah.
Would sometimes, even perhaps resent some of it, that daily attention, the media, a Canadian market, right? And
for sure.
Then you go off to Carolina, and you go off to Florida. And when I got traded back to Toronto, you mentioned the pressures and the attention, the microscope, the fishbowl. I loved it. and just it was maybe a little bit more mature, having a few more years underneath the belt. I just thought it was the coolest thing ever to have that type of attention on a daily basis, and not just at the rink. Going for a coffee, going to the mall, getting gas at the gas station, walking the mall, whatever it was, everywhere you went, it was, I could not believe the hockey fan and how they would recognize you, how they would ask you, what happened there last night? You guys, a great week. That game last night, loved that play, and it was nonstop. And again, when I go back to Calgary, I would have not a little bit resented, but I wouldn't embrace that. Right? It was more of an inconvenience. And coming back to Toronto, I love that part of it. That the hockey fan was just so in tune and so aware of what their Toronto Maple Leafs were doing, and not big picture. Like, we're talking living and breathing every single what happened last night, whether that be a win, loss, or a draw. What happened? How can we fix it? How can we bottle it? How can we move forward? Stanley Cup, this, that, the other thing. It was a lot of fun those 2 years in that regard.
This has been another episode of Boys in the Booth with Harper Cody, Chad Melbourne, and Casey Abrams. Connect with the Boys in the Booth on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Boys in the Booth. Visit boysinthebooth.com for show details. And don't forget, you can become a patron of the podcast for just $1 a month at patreon.com/boysinthebooth.